Hello, welcome to this unboxing video. I'm Dr. Chris Kerich here. We've got this wonderful box of retro games from DKOldies. Thank you, DKOldies. We're going to be unboxing here today for the University of Lethbridge Game Lab. We're in the process of rebuilding assets of the Game Lab here at University of Lethbridge, and this is kind of the first big installment of those games. I'm somewhat in charge of deciding what games to order and when, and it was quite difficult to decide kind of like where to start because there's so many games in the world. And the reason that we're getting a bunch of SNES and NES games today is I wanted to pick something that a lot of students wouldn't have played in their youth, but are maybe more accessible than things like the Commodore 64 or the Apple II, both of which we do have in the Game Lab. But we're going to stick with kind of the first console, home console games, or some of the very earliest from Nintendo specifically. So let's get into it. I'm going to open up this box. Try not to damage anything inside of the box. This is the part of unboxing videos that everyone likes. All right, let's see if this is open. Nope. Almost. All right. All right. Am I still visible on camera? All right. We got a lot of packing paper in here. We have our slips, our packing slips. Don't know what to show. These are all these. And we have a ton of games. I wish I could tilt the box actually to see, you can see how densely packed it is. I hope this shows. It's very dense. I'm gonna start pulling stuff out and we'll talk about it. So I'll just start at the start. So here we have a bunch of NES games. We have Metroid, the original Metroid, Super Metroid. It started a huge genre of games, the Metroidvania. This is a real classic in trying to like open world design can owe a lot to this sort of game mechanic. We have the original Yoshi game. The first standalone of very few Yoshi games. This is a puzzle game. This sort of like puzzle arcadey style of game was something that was really explored quite a lot in the NES era. I think partially from the success of Tetris, but from other sorts of games. We'll see later Dr. Mario is also in this sort of like stacking puzzler vein. And we also have here Punch-Out, also known as Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Very, very famous game for a lot of reasons. A sign, we'll see many of these tie-ins to real-life properties, which we still see today in a lot of game design. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out here, obviously tied in with Mike Tyson, the boxer. And it has had quite a cultural legacy as well as being like a difficult game. And you can find videos of people online now playing this blindfolded, playing this extremely quickly. It has a lot of kind of cultural power for being such an old game. Let's move right along here. Here we go. So here we have the original Super Mario Bros. I don't know, it's almost too much to say about this. Launched a whole media empire of the Mario games. Very, very famous, this has introduced all the classic things about Mario that we know, like mushrooms, the fire flower, breaking bricks, the Goombas, that all owes itself to this game. We also have here Super Mario Bros. 2, the sequel, very famously not originally designed as a Mario game, was originally titled Doki Doki Panic and became reskinned to be a Mario game due to Mario being so popular, and as such introduced a lot of strange elements that maybe wouldn't have originally been in Mario games, like Birdo, the Shy Guy, picking up turnips out of the ground. If you've played Smash Brothers, you know Peach can pull turnips out of the ground. That comes from this. Having multiple playable characters, which a lot of Mario games do now, originated in this as well. Really, really influential Mario game, and wasn't ever intended to be a Mario game from the start. And here we have Xevious, one of the two shmups or shoot 'em ups in this box. Xevious, really, really interesting as well. The shoot 'em up genre is kind of a direct port from the arcade, this kind of like flying a spaceship, shooting a bunch of enemies type of game. Xevious is really interesting, and Gradius, which is also in this box, in that it ported over a lot of kind of like arcade conventions to the home console release, which didn't totally work. Like high scores are very meaningful in an arcade because you can kind of compare them with people, and strangers, the public comes and sees your high scores. But at home, no one is seeing your high scores except you and your family. So this sort of like high score, kind of quarter munching style of game didn't really adapt itself as well to the home as many other types of game were able to. And so this is sort of the shmups are very popular in the arcade, and this is actually sort of the decline, the beginning of the decline of the genre. Even though Xevious and Gradius are really, really beloved, it still is kind of like the marker of the decline of that style of game. Okay. Yeah.
Slightly towards.
Oh, yeah.
So that it's catching this light.
Yeah, got it. Here we have, this is the Wii sensor bar. Thank you DKOldies for also sending us, we didn't order this, they also sent us a Wii and a bunch of Wii, well, this is a necessary part of the Wii. They sent us a Wii sensor bar, and there will be other Wii stuff, I'm sure, in this box. But we did not intentionally order a Wii, but I'm very grateful to have one. I'll just pull out all the Wii stuff, I think I see it. This is for unboxing completeness, but here's two Wiimotes. Here's two more Wiimotes. The Wii, very interesting console. Nintendo definitely playing with kind of alternative control structures. The idea being, if you're on the cutting edge, no one can be ripping you off. And so Nintendo has consistently tried to stay ahead of the curve, or at least try to set the curve. These are Joy-Cons, also for the Wii, in its console design. And the Wii is a big example of that. Two more Joy-Cons. I think this is the Wii. Here's the Wii itself. Beautiful, nice looking Wii. I don't have as much to say about it. Right along. All right, here's some SNES games. So I should have said at the start, the NES released 1983, the SNES released 1990. So this is 7 years later of game design and development and kind of the popularity and dissemination of these across homes. So we see a lot of iterations on kind of existing design trends and ideas that Nintendo were starting to explore in the NES era. This one, however, not necessarily a big design release. This is Tetris 2. This is probably every video game console ever released has Tetris, and the SNES is no exception to this. Tetris, a wildly popular game. It stands the test of time, and I think a lot of the kind of arcadey games that we'll see on the NES and SNES are trying to basically get a bite at Tetris's apple. They're trying to somehow get close to what Tetris could do. Here we have Super Metroid, probably the most beloved Metroid game. This iterated on and expanded the world that was set out in the original Metroid, and I think is generally agreed upon to have improved upon it in every way, and is held up as kind of a golden standard of what can be done in kind of a what's called a Metroidvania style game. Here we have Donkey Kong Country 2. I think we have a few other Donkey Kong countries. The Donkey Kong Country series is a really interesting kind of a thing to consider alongside Mario, in that these games are they're still side-scrolling platformers like the Mario games are, but Donkey Kong Country is exploring with a lot of different rendering styles and different paths through levels. It also has multiple playable characters, and yeah, is in general trying to explore the same sort of style of game, but in a different design space. And so it's really interesting to play these and then play a Mario game and to see how like the movement feels different, how the level design looks different, and I think especially the art styles are really, really experimental and interesting for for the SNES, which it normally would go for kind of a more directly realistic pixel style. The Donkey Kong Country series is really trying to get like almost a pseudo 3D rendered through pixels. It's really, really interesting. All right. We got some more SNES games here. Pilot Wings. Ooh. It's moving around a little bit in my hands. Pilot Wings, a flight simulator game. The flight simulator is kind of an enduring video game style. The idea of being able to fly a plane in a video game, I think, has captured the imagination of people forever. And Pilot Wings is no exception to that. Pilot Wings, SNES games in general are really interesting because there's a lot of attempt to try to represent 3D space without having access to what we might call modern 3D rendering tools. So Pilot Wings is an example of, again, trying to have like you're navigating a three-dimensional space in a very limited sort of way. So it's very, very interesting for that reason. Mortal Kombat 2, one of the classic fighting games probably of all time. Again, a very interesting rendering system. One of the few video games that is trying to do real life, motion capture or rotoscoping and bringing characters into, bringing real life video footage into a game and then using it as its like core gameplay. Mortal Kombat 2, also very notorious for igniting a lot of discussion about video game violence and gore. So it's maybe notorious for that reason. But yes, very important nonetheless. Here we have Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy, also a very, very important series of games for defining and expanding what role-playing games are and what they should do, introducing a lot of conventions and mechanics that exist in a lot of role-playing games. And we'll see this in a lot of games in this box, but the things like class systems, experience points, kind of traversing an open world map, all those things are being decided on and figured out through games like Final Fantasy II, Chrono Trigger's in here, some more Final Fantasies. All of them are kind of expanding on and figuring out those ideas. All right, here we have Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt, and this is an interesting one because we currently do not have the Duck Hunt laser scopes. So this is just the same game as the original Mario Bros, but it also has Duck Hunt in it. And maybe someday we will have those laser scopes. So I'm happy to have this, but Duck Hunt, also a very early example of Nintendo experimenting with peripherals. You would not just get this cartridge, you would also have to get laser light guns. Popping bubble wrap with my elbows. You have to get laser light guns to be able to use Duck Hunt. So this idea of video games are not just what comes in the cartridge, but it's also some like thing of a lifestyle thing, or it's also something where you need to buy additional accessories. This is like a very early foray into this. And it's also a bit of bringing sort of the arcade experience into the home. This idea of you'll be getting these kind of like fancy mechanical tools to use your video games. Dr. Mario, as I mentioned before, maybe the most successful of the non-Tetris arcadey puzzle games, using the kind of classic character of Mario to do what is otherwise not a very Mario game where you're matching pills as they fall down on the screen. But it is I think a very successful version of bringing sort of arcadey style puzzle games into the home. And we have just baseball. In modern days, it might be wild to think about having a video game that's just called baseball and is meant to represent baseball. But as I mentioned before, kind of what video games is being figured out in this early era of home consoles. And this idea of translating existing games into video games is a big kind of trend. We'll see this through baseball, and a few other games in here are just trying to take sports as a general concept and make them into games because that makes them, saleable products. What else is a video game meant to do besides be a game? And sports are games. So that's the logical thread that leads us to having baseball on the NES. But baseball's good, but it is a funny way we got there. DuckTales for the NES. This is also an example, as I mentioned, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, an example of using existing media properties, the DuckTales television show, to market and sell games. Another very famous example of this is the Aladdin game, which we unfortunately did not get a copy of, but the Aladdin game is another example of using existing media properties to sell games and to make them attractive and marketable. And so the DuckTales game is one example of that. Not necessarily like a super good game or a well-designed game per se, but it is a very important game in this sort of beginning of something we'll see a lot of, is this kind of like cross-media promotion of games and television shows, films, things like that. We have Kirby's Adventure. For those watching this who are big Kirby fans, this is Kirby's first appearance in video game format. And that's I think, thinking about Kirby and Yoshi and Mario and all these sorts of Nintendo characters which kind of have franchises of their own running is a really indicative or emblematic part of their design philosophy, which is to have these iconic characters and then put them into different kind of situations in order to sell games. Kirby has sort of conventions associated with it, like Kirby can inhale enemies and get their powers, and there's certain enemies which appear in Kirby games. But the most important thing about Kirby games is that Kirby is in them, and this is starting that that series, that media empire. So we have Dragon Warrior 3 here, which is also known as Dragon's Quest 3, and this is another JRPG that is setting and discovering and I think solidifying a lot of mechanics which we'll see appear again and again in RPG formats. Specifically, like Dragon's Quest 3 has a class system, which is something that we see now all the time. If you play any kind of RPG, there's usually some sort of class system, and they're starting to be kind of discovered and set in games like Dragon's Quest 3. Oh, there's so many more still in this box. Here is the Wii Power Brick. Not interesting. In here is, they gave us a Wii Sports, actually very interesting. Nintendo was often bundling games with their consoles, and Wii Sports was the bundled game with the Wii. It was very, very successful, probably the most played Wii game because it came with every single Wii that was sold. So there was a certain strategy around that. And this has gone through video game consoles for years and years now, which is they almost are never sold without the ability to play something on them right away. Some later day consoles, this has been solved by having online stores, being like you can just download a game right away. But for these more like disc-based systems or cartridge-based, they would usually be bundled with something so that the kind of value proposition seemed better. You know, you would be getting a console, but you would also have something to play right away. All right, some more SNES games. Super Mario Kart. For those of you who like Mario Kart, this is the kind of originator of that franchise. And for those of you who only played maybe Mario Kart on the N64 or later versions, this is actually a really, really different feeling game. You still are racing karts around a map, but everything is flat, like the terrain, everything is flat, and there are obstacles on it, but it's rendered in a kind of a flat way. It's a kind of very unique rendering style, actually very similar to how Pilot Wings kind of approaches 3D space. Really, really worth seeing and experiencing, but it started that kind of kart racing franchise and is also very important for Nintendo of the idea of kind of like mix and matching and bringing these kind of characters into games together. So yeah, Mario Kart's really, really interesting for that reason. And this is if you were to lay out all the Mario Karts that have ever been made, which are so many now, this would stand out as like a very, very unique one. We have Donkey Kong Country 3. Not that much to say on this one that is different than what I said on Donkey Kong Country 2, but again, really, really interesting rendering styles, really interesting ways of engaging with level design in space. Really is worth checking out. Here we have Super Ghouls and Ghosts. There is original Ghouls and Ghosts in here somewhere. I wish I had gotten to that one first because this is the sequel. But Super Ghouls and Ghosts is really interesting because the original Ghouls and Ghosts was a arcade port to home console, which was true of a lot of games. They would have an arcade release and then they would also have a home console release either simultaneously or later. But once we start to get to the SNES era in the 1990s, that started to happen less and less, and games would be released exclusively for home consoles. And so Super Ghouls and Ghosts is in the Ghouls and Ghosts franchise, which was thought of as an arcade franchise, but this was only released for the SNES, not for arcade. which is really emblematic of the shift in focus of Nintendo and other kinds of game publishers from the arcade to home console, as home console started to be being seen as the place money was being made, the place that they wanted to focus on, and the arcade became emphasized less and less in the early 90s. Okay, what do we have here? We have Adventure Island for the NES. This is another side-scrolling platform game that is exploring a lot of the same sorts of design philosophies we see in Mario games and other side-scrollers. Adventure Island, I mean, this whole kind of genre of platformer is really becoming more and more popular in the home console era. In arcades, you wouldn't see too many side-scrollers. Games would take other kinds of forms. But the side-scroller has had a huge boom in the home console space, I think comparatively to other sorts of video game genres. Here you have Street Fighter II, probably, I think arguably the best fighting game of all time, certainly a very, very important one. Introduced a lot of very unique ideas about fighting games. The idea that fighting game rosters should have characters from all over the world. So if you ever played Overwatch or a game like that where they have like the characters and their nationalities are really, really important to how they kind of fit into that game world, that started in Street Fighter II. And also so many other things. Street Fighter II is still played at the competitive level at fighting game conventions like EVO. It is just a very enduring fighting game, and yeah, has a lot of importance in the world. So Street Fighter II is a really good get. It's a really, really important game. And it is another example of sort of like a cross arcade and home release as well. We have Chrono Trigger, probably, I think, again, arguably one of the best role-playing games of all time. Chrono Trigger is definitely playing with a lot of RPG mechanics, and I think very importantly in the RPG world is one of the first where individual characters in Chrono Trigger have a lot of personality and are, I think, a big motivating reason for playing it is to see where those characters' storylines go and how they kind of interact with the world. If you look at some of like the early Final Fantasies, characters are kind of just their classes and they don't have a ton of maybe personality outside of that. But Chrono Trigger, the world and the characters have a lot of personality and care and craft put into them, which makes it, I think, for a lot of people, stand head and shoulders above some of those early RPGs due to that kind of really personal, deep characterization in the characters. Oh, we're getting there. What's next? We haven't gotten any of the Zelda stuff yet. I'm excited to see it. Still not. Okay. So here we have the original Metal Gear for the NES. Very, very important. I've said that probably 100 times. This is also very important. Started the kind of stealth action genre of game. Not a lot of games kind of incorporated stealth as a mechanic as much as Metal Gear did. And it is very important for that reason. Stealth is kind of really cornerstone mechanic in so much game design philosophies and across so many game genres, and a lot of it owes itself to games like Metal Gear for experimenting with that kind of a mechanic. So, any Metal Gear. Lode Runner is one of those games that is a classic and was very, very popular, but is also very, very extremely simple and is an interesting game for that reason. I don't personally like Lode Runner that much, but it is very important in that it sold very, very well and is very, very popular and has appeared across a lot of game systems. I remember playing Lode Runner on the DOS, and I remember seeing Lode Runner on my early Windows computers. Lode Runner is just very enduring for being a very, very simple level-based game. Here we have Gradius. This is another shmup or shoot 'em up, opposed to Xevious, which is a top-down view. Gradius is a side-to-side view, and all those things I said about shmups still apply to Gradius. Kind of bringing in this kind of like high scoring system, these sort of extra hard levels that are meant to consume a lot of quarters in the arcade, but don't really translate to home release as well because you can just kind of play them as much as you want. You're not kind of limited by money or time. And so, yeah, Gradius is another great example of that. Really, really beloved, but also, I think, kind of sad if you're a shmup fan to see kind of the trajectory of that genre after the era of Gradius and Xevious. Okay, Donkey Kong Classics. Now this is a collection, this is Donkey Kong, the original Donkey Kong, and Donkey Kong Jr. Donkey Kong being very important because it's one of the first, it's the first sort of appearance of Mario as a character. It's not called Mario, but he's in the game, he's jumping over barrels as he's trying to get up to Donkey Kong. Princess Peach is in it too. No, that's Pauline. Pauline is in this. And this is a very interesting, this is a collection of it and Donkey Kong Jr., which is another arcade game that features a character which has not really appeared since then, I believe, Donkey Kong Jr., who climbs up the vines and does various Donkey Kong things. Donkey Kong Jr. is very good and was primarily an arcade game that got ported into Donkey Kong Classics bundle. Here we have Pro Wrestling, another NES game and another idea of taking a kind of an existing sport or very game-like thing like pro wrestling and turning it into a video game because that's what games are. They're trying to figure out what games are, and this is one way of trying to kind of get at that idea is by taking something like pro wrestling, which is very gamey, you know, you can win and lose a match, and trying to translate it into a video game format. Here we have Excite Bike, a very, very exciting game. I think maybe one of the few, if only racing games, I guess Mario Kart as well, in this box. But the idea of a racing game, again, racing is a contest, it's a game. It becomes really easily translatable into this sort of digital game format and is one big example of that happening. There's such a huge pile of bubble wrap over here. I don't think you can see it on camera, but it's massive. All right. This is the last of the 3 Mario games we have in this box, Super Mario Bros. 3. This is probably the crystallization of a lot of Mario things that would go on to define Mario games probably for the next 10 years. Some more like Mario conventions got added to this, the Tanuki suit, which you see pictured in the label, hopefully, as addition to some other kind of like map traversal mechanics and things like that, which did not exist in the first 2 Mario games. This sort of level design philosophy is, I think, what Nintendo latched onto the most for what a Mario game should look like. And if you were to play some of these later kind of throwback Mario games, like Mario Maker is directly referencing this, or even some of the Super Mario Wonder type games are all kind of engaging with Mario level design in the vein of Super Mario Bros. 3. So I think this is kind of Nintendo's kind of perfection of the Mario formula in a lot of ways. Here's the original Ghouls and Ghosts. This was an arcade release and is, I think, generally held to be a really, really difficult game for that reason. Super Ghouls and Ghosts as well is carrying on this kind of difficult game tradition, but Ghouls and Ghosts was difficult because it was an arcade game and you're meant to lose a lot and spend a lot of quarters in order to progress in the game. Whereas Super Ghouls and Ghosts does not have that sort of quarter mechanic, but it still carries on the tradition of being really, really hard. And I think this is how we kind of see some of the starting ideas about video game difficulty is through this kind of idea of arcade difficulty becoming translated into home consoles, where difficulty was not actually a financial concern as much as a kind of design concern. And so that kind of translation is starting to happen here. Here we have Mega Man 3. This is actually the only Mega Man in this box, unfortunately, but the Mega Man franchise is also kind of happening at the same time as the Mario franchise, more or less. And so this, I forget which of the Robot Masters are in this one, but Mega Man is, the first 7 Mega Man games are really, really consistent design-wise and are, I think, a good example of where Mario was being very experimental. The Mega Man games are actually hewing really, really tightly to a very specific formula, maybe to their benefit and maybe not, depending on if you like the Mega Man formula. All right, we're almost there. Here we have volleyball. I think the third of the kind of direct sports into video games that we have here. Not too much else to say about this other than it is another example of taking an existing sport and then trying to figure out how to make it into a video game, and volleyball is an example of that. Here we have Yoshi's Cookie. This is another like arcade puzzler, and Yoshi's Cookie has had kind of a weird trajectory as well in terms of the long time of history. Was popular when it came out, but has had a big resurgence recently. There are now professional Yoshi's Cookie tournaments happening again. I think there's a certain I think there's a bit of nostalgia that goes into that, but I think it also is probably quite a strong, it still is a very strong puzzle, like fast-paced arcadey puzzle game, and is, I think, respected for that even now, even despite its age. I'm gonna hold on to this one so I can talk about them together. Some kind of idea of pacing. All right, here we have Dragon Warrior 1 and 2. So this is Dragon's Quest 1 and 2 in Japan. Again, a start of the RPG, JRPG world, and again is setting a lot of kind of mechanics and systems that we've come to know and respect in RPGs, like classes, experience, mechanics, overworlds, things like that. So here we have the gold cartridge versions of The Legend of Zelda and The Adventures of Link. These are very shiny. I don't know how they're appearing on camera, but these are very important games for a lot of reasons. The Legend of Zelda starts the Zelda franchise and is the, for those of you who've never played it, it's a top-down game where you control Link and it's a very zoomed out sort of overworld map view. Many of the later Zelda games, like if you ever played Link's Awakening or Link to the Past, or I don't know, even Minish Cap, a lot of those Zelda games are directly taking the sort of conventions and style and design of this game and translating it into new consoles and adding new mechanics and things like that. This was previously owned by someone named Aaron Davis, I can see on the back. This is a very important game for so many reasons. I'm really happy to have this version of it. And yeah, it's a design classic, and I think this idea also of having multiple areas on the world that you can somewhat access in a path that you choose. Yeah, it's just really important game. We have The Adventure of Link, which is also really interesting game in being a sequel to the original Legend of Zelda, but not being super successful. It changed a lot of design conventions about it. This game is a top-down like overworld map traversal, and this is a side-scroller. And while not being super successful, still came out in an era of games where if you've ever seen kind of the early like Legend of Zelda cartoons, this was based on this game and not as much as on the original Legend of Zelda. In addition, while this side-scrolling kind of became excised out of a lot of the Zelda games going forward, I think due to this game not being as successful, it still does appear in games like Link to the Past and other of those kind of top-down Zelda games, but just in kind of limited kind of specific areas. So it's very interesting for a franchise as successful as Legend of Zelda to have as much of a black sheep as the Adventures of Link, but they still both I think cemented that franchise that we see now all the way to Tears of the Kingdom today. So that is everything in this box, I think. Yes, it is. Wow. What a blur. Thank you again very much to DKOldies for sending us all these games. They're going to be put to good use in the game lab, and I hope to maybe record another video like this when we get another big shipment in and we continue to rebuild some of our assets here at University of Lethbridge. Thank you very much.